الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we are at the prostration of forgetfulness. The prostration of forgetfulness. Now there are three parts to this that should be understood whenever you discuss this particular topic. And that is, number one, if somebody adds something extra to the prayer, then a prostration should be done to make up for that. Or number two, if someone forgets something in the prayer, so somebody leaves off something that they should have done from the prayer, then a prostration is done for that. Now, we've discussed which one of the things that if you forget them, is it as opposed to, for example, forgetting a pillar of the salah, as opposed to one of the wajib or the sunnah acts of the salah. We talked about these issues already. After this, inshallah, we will go into all of the sunnah acts of the prayer, which is very long, but inshallah, we will go through them once we're done this particular section. So the second one is if somebody misses something of the prayer. And the third one is a sujood should be done for the one who is in doubt. If a person is just not sure how many rak'ats they did or what position they're supposed to be in at that particular time of the salah, then the sajda should be done for this as well. In terms of the first one, adding something to the prayer, this can be one of two types. Number one is that if a person is adding something to the prayer that is from the actions of the prayer itself. So it's not something brand new that they're adding, but it's actually part of the prayer in and of itself. So for example, they do an extra sitting or an extra standing or an extra prostration and that sort of thing. If this is done intentionally, then the prayer is invalid. It is not complete. So if a person intentionally wants to add an extra sujood, then obviously the prayer is not valid anymore, because the Prophet ﷺ tells us, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad." Anybody who tries to create something new in our religion, nothing will happen to that thing except that it is rejected by the deen itself. So this is something that is agreed upon all of the madhahib. So a person adding something to the salah and it's done intentionally. The second scenario under the same category of adding something is, of course, if a person has done it inadvertently. So a person did it without the intention of doing it. They added something, but it was just by accident. So here, what a person should do is that they should offer the prostration of forgetfulness. So you see what happened in the first one? If it's done intentionally, it doesn't matter. You don't need to do a sujood here. The whole salah is invalid. You need to repeat the entire prayer. But this one here, if you do it accidentally, then here you can do the sajda to sahu, which is two sajdas. And this here is based on a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentions: if a person adds or subtracts forgetfully, then let him prostrate sajdatain, two sajdas. So the Prophet ﷺ in hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, he mentions this. And if one realizes in the middle of this that one has forgetfully added an act of prayer, such as an additional rak'ah, then one should sit down right away, because otherwise one will have added an extra act of the prayer intentionally. And obviously we talked about that, you don't want to do that. In terms of adding actions that are not from the prayer itself, such as walking or scratching or, playing with the beard or opening a door or something, then this is a problem. This here is an issue where a lot of people, they do this. A lot of sisters, you'll find that when they're praying, they're always fixing their hijab in the first or in the salah itself. Always tying, putting this, doing that. So For the brother, same idea, always fixing his shirt, scratching his beard. Often you might see somebody doing this in the salah. Whilst he's praying, he's just kind of twirling and kneading his beard at the same time. All of these little things here is an issue when it comes to the salah. But how? Number one is that if it is done a lot, if a person constantly does this in the prayer itself, so if the person does this a lot intentionally without any need, then believe it or not, bil ijma' the salah is batil. The salah is invalid. If a person constantly is doing this, just intentionally, just out of carelessness, doesn't have no importance, no relevance to the prayer itself, then the ulama, they come to an agreement that this person is simply being extremely careless with the prayer. There's no attentiveness in the salah itself. Then of course the salah becomes invalid. And this is one of the reasons why Allah Azza wa Jal says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. The salah is something heavy, it's a burden, except on the people who have khushu', except for the people who are amongst the mu'minun, the people who are devoted in their prayers. The lesson for us here, brothers and sisters, is very simple. When you're in salah, imagine you're standing in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. You don't want to always be busy scratching and picking at things and trying to fix your clothes at the same time, or fix your hijab and doing all of these different things, because what that does is it's very disrespectful for the prayer itself, but then at the same time it shows a lack of attentiveness. It shows carelessness to the prayer. It shows that you don't really care about what you're doing at that moment. Unfortunately, we used to see this a lot when we were in Medina. We used to see it a lot in a lot of different places as well. And unfortunately, we even see it a lot in communities that you and I, we might visit from time to time. You see people that are constantly doing this, and you want to make sure that this is something that is cleansed out of the salah as much as possible. Stay focused. You're standing in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. Stay focused and give Him the utmost respect. Imagine if you had an interview and you sat in front of that manager or in front of that boss. Would you be doing the same things like this all the time in front of them? No, you wouldn't, because bad manners, bad etiquettes. And even Imam Malik rahimahullah, when he used to sit in front of his teacher, he would sit in such a manner that he would not even turn the pages of his book in front of his shaykh, because he did not want to disturb the shaykh in any way, shape or form. So even that, imagine that love and devotion and respect that he has for his teacher. Imagine how he is in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a Mitsubishi BPL2 898. I don't know what the situation is, but I'm assuming you're blocking someone or something like that. A Mitsubishi BPL2 898. So that's the one thing that you want to make sure, insha'Allah, that you try to avoid as much as possible when it comes to the prayer. Another way to look at this is that if it was done unintentional and forgetfully, then such a person who has finished the prayer thinking that he has finished then goes off, only to be told later that subsequently he offers it again, then the prayer is still correct according to the stronger opinion. Basically, this image, how it looks is that you might have prayed a prayer and you think that your prayer was perfect, but a brother comes up to you and says, look, you prayed an extra rak'ah, or you did something wrong in the salah. So what should you do at that moment? Should you go and pray your prayer over again, or is it innamal a'malu binniyat and that's it? Your actions are judged by intention. So you had the intention of that you thought everything was good, so you should just go with that. Then what is the most stronger opinion? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But a person, if they are certain that they did not make any mistakes in their prayer, then they have more right over the hukm or the validity of that prayer than someone else. So even if somebody comes up to you and says, look, I saw you added an extra rak'ah to the prayer, but you say to him, I am 100% sure I didn't add an extra rak'ah to the prayer. As a matter of fact, this happened to me a long time ago. You know, for the Eid prayers, you have the 9 takbirats in the beginning and then the second in the next rak'ah. Well, I was doing the Eid prayer in one of the other masjids, and one of the person, they came up to me and they said, you forgot one of the takbirs. You didn't do 9 or you didn't do 7. So I told him, I said, I don't think so. I think I did all of them. And he said, no, you missed one for sure. So I said to him, no, I'm positive I got all of them. And then alhamdulillah, a couple brothers as well kind of supported me and told me, yes, we didn't see a problem, or else we would have, told him something. So the hukum, the ruling that came out of that prayer is, obviously I didn't go and I repeat the salah itself. The salah was valid because I was certain of one thing, and my hukum, my ruling, takes precedence over those around me. Another way to look at this issue is that if one does a lot of moving, shaking, scratching, picking, all those things in the salah, and does it intentionally but with an excuse, such as the one who keeps on needing to close gaps, or the one who needs to prevent someone from choosing in front of the sutra or crossing in front of the sutra, etc., then this, of course, the prayer is correct. So here the image that looks like is that you have to move because there's a reason to move. Somebody's about to come and cross in front of you, so you need to block them. Obviously you're moving here. Or you need to prevent or you need to close gaps in the line, then obviously you constantly keep moving. This is okay. Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah puts a limit of 3 steps. Don't take more than 3 large steps when you need to close gaps and things like that. So inshallah, it goes back to the same idea, not to do this a lot, or don't become habitual in this process. The Prophet ﷺ opened the door of Aisha radiallahu anha, and then he also picked up his granddaughter Umama. All of this here happened, of course, after the salah, and even prior to the salah as well. So it just kind of shows that even it didn't have that sense of contentment, settlement in the prayer before or after as well. Now, in terms of missing something in the prayer, in terms of omitting or missing something or excluding something of the prayer, one can omit either an obligatory action or a pillar from this prayer. So one of 2 things can happen here. You either forget to do a wajib act of the prayer, or you forget or you ignore a pillar of the prayer. An obligatory action that is forgotten or it's not done, then one should perform a prostration of forgetfulness. This is one of the wajibat acts of salah, and we've talked about this already. It is known that the Prophet ﷺ forgot the first tashahhud and went directly into the 3rd rak'ah, so he made 2 prostrations of forgetfulness just before the taslim, and this is of course narrated in Bukhari and Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ himself, once upon a time, did this happened to him. Now we mentioned that the first tashahhud is a wajib act of the prayer. It's a wajib act of the prayer. So obviously here in this case you can do the 2 sujuds, and that's sufficient enough. When a pillar or a rukn of the salah is omitted or forgotten, then a person, obviously if they did this intentionally, then the prayer is incomplete and they need to revise the prayer once again. If it's done forgetfully, then it is moved on. Then if one has moved on to that same pillar in the next rak'ah, then complete the rak'ah is invalidated, and the new rak'ah takes on account previously invalidated one. So look, that's very wordy explanation, so let's make it simple. Basically what's happening here is that if somebody does forget a pillar of the salah, then the pillar is nullified unless they do one thing, and that is they make it up in another rak'ah of the prayer itself. Then insha'Allah that new rak'ah invalidates the old one. So for example, imagine if you're praying and in the 2nd rak'ah the person does or forgets to do one of the sujood. So he goes down for ruku' in the 2nd rak'ah and goes down for sujood, but then he stops there. And whilst he's doing the tashahhud, he realizes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to do a 2nd sujood and I forgot. So what does he do here at this point? He stands up and he repeats that rak'ah, and he does it with the 2 complete sujood. Then before he finishes that prayer, what does he do? He does the 2 sajda or sajdatain of forgetfulness. So he basically what the sajda to sahu is all about, think about it like you're apologizing to Allah Azza wa Jal. You're saying sorry for a mistake that you've made in the prayer. Because what this does is that it protects the sanctity of that prayer. The prayer itself becomes sacred. You're not just going to play around. You're not just going to, allow things to happen carelessly. You're going to make sure that you watch every single movement of the prayer as best as possible. So that's why we have the sajda at the end of the salah itself. As you continue, the doubtful or the person who has any doubt in the prayer itself, if one doubts whether one has done a pillar or not, then one should consider that one has yet to do it. So obviously, if you think you forgot something but you're not sure, what does it count as? It counts as you forgot it. So don't just say, well, I think I forgot, but, hopefully my instincts are good and I just continue praying as normal. No, in this case here, you need to act on what you forgot and redo that particular part or rak'ah or something that you missed of that prayer. It's the opposite with wudu. Wudu is the opposite. Suppose you had wudu and you don't remember if you broke your wudu or not, but you do remember that you made wudu. So what's the hukum here? What's the ruling behind it? It builds on what you are certain of. You're certain that you have wudu. You're certain that you made the wudu. So your ruling takes the ruling as though you still have wudu and not that you broke it. So, but with salah, it's the complete opposite. If you think you broke it, then you did break it, period. Why? Because of course the sanctity of the salah is far greater than the sanctity of the state of wudu. Whoever doubts the number of rak'ahs he has prayed, then he should base it on the least most certain amount of rak'ah. So if a person might be at the 3rd rak'ah or might be at the 4th rak'ah, he's not sure, he might be at the 3rd or the 4th, which one should he go to? He should go and build his salah based on the 3rd rak'ah and not the 4th one at that point. When and how to offer this particular prostration or this sajda to sahu. If the prostration is due to an omission, offer them before the taslim. And if the prostrations are due to an increase, then offer them after the taslim. These are 2 key points, brothers and sisters, so keep this in mind. If the prostration is because you forgot something or you didn't do something in the prayer, then inshallah what you do is you do the sujood before the taslim. So before the taslim means this, you have done something or you have forgotten something in the prayer. You've missed something in that salah. However, if the prostration, you're doing it because you accidentally added something to the prayer, then of course this will be done after the taslim itself. And these are all based on narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has done this himself, and many of the companions, including Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr, the 4 Khulafa al-Rashidin, and so on. Even there are many statements, practices that happened even during the time of the Tabi'un. If a person is in doubt, built the case upon the least most certain, then offer them before the taslim. If the imam acted upon the most probable case, then it should be after the taslim. So it goes back to the same point that we're talking about here, that obviously you miss something before the taslim, 2 sujuds. You add something after the taslim, which is the 2 sujuds as well. Whether the prostrations are offered before or after, this is a matter of recommendation only. So you see here, brothers and sisters, now we open the door of when you should do this kind of sujood. The ulama, they differ on exactly if it should always be under this methodology that we've given you. Some of the ulama said, no, all of the sujood should be done immediately after the taslim. Many of the fuqaha, they took this opinion. Whereas other scholars, they said, no, it should be done before the taslim. And this here, Allah Azza wa Jal knows best, but it seems as though this is the majority opinion, that it's done before the taslim. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. It seems like many of the scholars of hadith, based on the evidences for that particular choice, it seems like to be a stronger evidence, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Because this issue is still and always up in the air, it's very difficult to give a rajih opinion regarding this particular issue. Is there a tashahud here? No, there's no tashahud, there's nothing. Basically what the person should do is that they just do the taslim after the tashahud is over. Now scholars differ exactly when this should happen. Is the tashahud over after you send as-salatu was-salam ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or does it include the dua after that as well? Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr wa min adhab al-nar wa min fitnati al-mahya wa mat wa min fitnati al-masih al-dajjal. Is it after that dua? Scholars differ on this. Majority of ulama, they say that the arkan of the tashahhud is the tashahhud itself and the salah and the salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it must be done after this. You have the option of also doing it after that dua. So if a person could not or did not say that dua at the end, their salah is still valid by saying the tashahhud and the salat and the salam. But that point there is when they should do the sajda. They have the option of doing it there at that very moment. What is not permissible is if the person does the tashahhud and then the salat and the salam upon the Prophet ﷺ, then they do the two sujuds, and then they continue after the two sujuds and they do that dua. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr wa min adhab al-nar, and so on. And then they do the dua and then they do the taslim. This is not permissible. Why? Because the last thing that should happen before the salah is over is the sajdatain. So you make the choice whether you do it after all of this or you do it after the salat and the salam upon the Prophet ﷺ, and then you do the taslim immediately. So just keep that in mind. It's a very technical issue. I know this halaqah is a little bit different from how the halaqahs that we've done, because I'm reading and transferring a lot of information to you. That's the way that this mas'ala is built. It's not necessarily a practical issue, but it's more theoretical than anything else. Then it continues. If an imam makes a mistake, then the man should point it out by saying Subhanallah. So a man should point it behind him and say Subhanallah aloud, as opposed to the woman. And this is based on a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. A woman, what does she do? She claps her hands. Now, can you imagine that even the ulama, they differ on how many claps she should do? Imam al-Shafi'i says that she should do 3 claps. Other ulama said 2. Majority said it doesn't matter. Enough to get the attention of that imam. Some scholars, Imam al-Nawawi, he mentions that a woman is allowed to say Subhanallah as long as she's not praying with any strange men. So if her father or her husband is leading her in salah, she's allowed to say Subhanallah in this case. But Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. I didn't find any evidence for this. I found a statement and an opinion, but it was very difficult to try to support it as best as I could. But it was just interesting to know that that was there. And the logic that I put together myself behind why Imam al-Nawawi would have mentioned this was simply because in this particular case, her voice is not an awra anymore. We all know that the voice of a woman in the salah, it acts as though it's an awra of the salah itself. But obviously this is not an issue when she's praying with somebody who can be her mahram. So in this case here, it permits her to do that. But Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. I encourage, and majority of the ulama, they also encourage that a woman should still continue to clap the hands when the imam makes a mistake here. Question. Suppose the imam is reciting a surah and he makes a mistake in that surah. And the people who are praying behind him, they know that he made that mistake, but nobody corrects him. Nobody corrects him at all. So, he skips an ayah or something, and nobody pauses him or corrects him. So he continues to pray. What should happen here? Should somebody correct him after? Is the salah still valid? The answer is yes, the salah is still valid, simply because what is the hukm of reciting a surah after Fatiha when it comes to the prayer? Is a salah still valid if a person only recites Surah Fatiha? The answer is yes. Why? Because the Fatiha is a pillar of the salah. It's a rukn. Whereas the surahs that are recited is a mustahab act. In other words, if you do it, you get the reward, but if you don't, Allah doesn't punish you for it. This is one of the key things to note of how you can speed up a salah but still pray it with tranquility and ease. One of the ways to do this is to know the shortcuts of salah. I hate to use that word, but I mean that's pretty much what it ends up being. It ends up being that you get the shortcuts of those salah. So for example, you're only going to recite Surah Fatiha, you go down for ruku'. Instead of saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim 3 times, you say it just once. You say Sami Allahu liman hamida. But instead of saying Rabbana wa lakal hamd, hamdan tayyiban mubarakan fi, and so on, you don't say anything. You just say Sami Allahu liman hamida and you go down for the sujood. You're doing the bare minimum of every single movement of the salah. When it comes to the tashahhud, you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد, and so on. That's the complete. But if you say اللهم صل على محمد, according to Imam Shafi'i, that is the bare minimum of the salah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the salah, Imam Shafi'i mentions this very clearly in his madhab, that the salah becomes valid and the person is still counted as though they've prayed. But obviously the problem is that they've lost reward. You're losing reward when you do this. So you don't want to make this a habit. That's why I am very hesitant to mention this in a public halaqah, simply because I don't want to open that door for just anyone to do each and every single time. In terms of leading others to in prayer, the Prophet ﷺ said, let the most knowledgeable of you about the book of Allah Azza wa Jal lead you in prayer. If they are similar in recitation, then the most knowledgeable about the sunnah. If they are equal in their knowledge of the sunnah, then the one who did hijrah before the other. And this is hadith narrated in Sahih Muslim. So you see what the first criteria is? The one who has the most knowledge of you of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. The word that's used in this hadith is ilm, the ilmul kitab, who has knowledge of the book of Allah. You notice that nowhere in the hadith it says the one who has the best recitation of the hadith of the Quran. The reason why is that the Prophet ﷺ here, the ulama, they say, Imam al-Nawawi, when he explains this hadith, he says, this is the way that you don't restrict it to just recitation. Recitation is extremely important. It perhaps is probably one of the most important things when you look for an imam. But part of the ilm of the Quran is not only recitation, but it's also to have an idea of how the Quran should be recited. All those things that we talked about in the last halaqah, when to begin, when to end, how to choose certain paragraphs in a particular surah, and so on, when to begin, when to stop, and all of these little things. So you need somebody who has that. Now if you do have it, then obviously you're going to look for somebody who's most knowledgeable in the sunnah. If you have two people like that, look for the one who has the sunnah in him. If you don't, then the one who did hijrah before the other. What this means here is the one who did hijrah before the other. It's talking about the one who is more inclined to practice what he or she knows than the other person. The more practicing individual, the person who has more of the deen in terms of his posture, in terms of his appearance, in terms of his etiquette, in terms of his practice, prays all the sunnah, has mashallah a nice beard. All of these things now are included in the last part of the hadith. Last part of the hadith looks at the entire picture, including the qira'ah of the Quran, the knowledge of the Quran, and then of course the knowledge of the sunnah. There's a really interesting story of Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah, Shaykh bin Baz, and Shaykh Uthaymeen rahmatullahi alayhim. All three of these shuyukh, they went for Hajj one year. and they all stayed in the same tent in Mina. Can you imagine, I don't even know what this would look like. Can you imagine if Shaykh Albani, Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh Uthaymeen, all three of them, these are like 3 planets sitting right in front of you, subhanAllah. You have everything with hadith, fiqh and aqeedah all sitting there. And when it came time to the salah, they were debating who should lead the prayer. So Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, he points to Shaykh bin Baz and say, you lead us in prayer because you're the man of fiqh, you understand the ahkam of the deen and so on, so you lead it. So Shaykh bin Baz says, no. Let's let Shaykh Uthaymeen lead us in prayer because he's the man of aqeedah and this is the usul of our deen and so on, so he should lead us. So Shaykh Uthaymeen says, no. Let Shaykh Albani lead us in prayer. Because Shaykh Albani, he has the ilm of the sunnah and he is closest to the Quran because of his knowledge of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Shaykh bin Baz agreed with that. So there was an ijma' against Shaykh Albani at that point. Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh Uthaymeen, they agreed, okay, that makes sense the most. He has the Quran and he also has the thing that's closest to the Quran, which is the sunnah. So Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah ends up leading the salah the rest of the way for the Hajj. So it just kind of adds a little bit of flavor, I guess, to this point here when it comes to the person who has the most knowledge of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, and also with the sunnah to lead in the prayer. It is not permissible to pray behind somebody whose prayer is invalid in and of itself. So a person whose salah itself is invalid and you know it's invalid, they don't have wudu or something, obviously it's not permissible to pray behind them. However, if the imam, let's just say he's not sure, he gets up, he prays, he says Allahu Akbar, the jama'ah follows him. During the prayer he realizes that he doesn't have wudu, then what he needs to do, and he finds out later, he needs to repeat the prayer himself. But as far as the prayer of the jama'ah is concerned, the jama'ah's prayer is still correct. They still count. They don't need to redo his prayer. He's the one that has to do it on his own. The problem is that if he knows that his prayer was invalid or he didn't have wudu and he continued to lead the jama'ah, this is where the problem begins. Now what happens if this is the case? Suppose the imam is leading us in prayer and he breaks the salah. Let's say he passes wind or something and the salah gets broken. What does he do? What choices does he have here? Immediately what he has to do is he has to step out of the salah itself and grab and designate somebody to continue to lead the jama'ah. And this is it sounds easier than it looks. It sounds very easy to implement. It's very tricky because you don't want to just grab just anybody and get them to continue to lead the salah. You need to obviously consider who's behind you. This is why it's part of the etiquettes of building the jama'ah that you always have the people who are most fluent of the Quran, most knowledgeable of the sunnah and things like that. They are always the one that are closest to praying behind the imam because they need to fill that void, that gap, if they're called upon. So you want to make sure that there is even a fiqh of how you build the jama'ah behind the imam. The kids are usually at the back. Why? Because the kids get rowdy. They're always moving, they're always scratching, itching, they always want to turn around and play. You don't want to disturb the people who are up in the front, so the sunnah is to line the kids at the back. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ himself would take some of the children and he would line up the children himself at the back. He would do it by hand. And obviously you see what Shaykh Bashir, hafidhahullah, what he does. And this is also the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, is to check each and every single line. There is a tremendous reward for this effort. There's a tremendous reward for this effort. And subhanAllah, as I'm sure all of you know, very few people can do this sort of thing. And this is somebody that's very gifted to have that kind of discipline that each and every single salah, they do this sort of thing. Other than that, inshallah, we'll just take one more mas'ala and then we will pause for today. Bi'awnillahi ta'ala. If the imam starts off praying standing and then during the prayer needs to sit down because, he catches a cramp or some sort of inability to carry on standing in the prayer, then those who follow should still carry on standing in the prayer. In other words, it is permissible for an imam to be in a wheelchair and lead the jama'ah in salah. It is permissible for the imam, if he's praying and after the first rak'ah he feels a pain in his leg or something and he can't stand up again, then he can continue to lead the jama'ah whilst he is sitting down, because the Prophet ﷺ, he also prayed whilst the companions behind him. He once prayed sitting down whilst the companions behind him prayed while they were standing. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had started the prayers with them standing. So this is something that also happened during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We will still continue this section about some of the etiquettes of the imams and how to lead the jama'ah in prayer. We will continue this inshallah on Friday as we continue our halaqah session. We will pause inshallah for today just simply because I have a conference meeting in my office. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always and forever cause us to purify our salawat and to put ikhlas in each and every one of our prayers. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal always and forever to cause our children and the youth to also love the salah and love the prayer in and of themselves. And we want insha'Allah the youth to look at the grown-ups, look at the mothers and the fathers and the people who are older than you, look and see how they pray. You see, one of the problems with a lot of the youth today is that they don't look at people who are older than them as examples. They either would look at somebody that's equal to them. This is why, personally for myself, I refuse to always play that role where, you'll get invited to some place or some event and they will say to you, we want somebody young to communicate to the youth. Sure, that does work to at least open the door, but the work, it still has to come from how we deal with our youth and the discipline that we put with them so that they can respect and look up to the elders and appreciate their experience and appreciate what they have. There's an interesting story of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. He was sitting and he was giving fatwa about Ramadan, and he was too young to fast. He was actually sitting and he was drinking water whilst he's issuing fatwa to the people about Ramadan. So a man came up to him and asked him, why are you drinking? So Imam al-Shafi'i responds and he says, because I haven't reached I'm not baligh, I'm not mature enough to fast. He was below puberty. So the man asked him, how old are you? So Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah responds and says, none of your business. So the man asks Imam al-Shafi'i, why are you saying that? I'm just asking your age. Why are you giving me an answer like that? So Imam al-Shafi'i responds and he says, I heard my shaykh, one of his shuyukh, he was also asked by a man how old he was. So a man came up to Imam al-Shafi'i's teacher and asked him, how old are you? And Imam al-Shafi'i's teacher responded to this man and told the man, none of your business. So Imam al-Shafi'i said, I just copied his answer and I said it to you as well. So it shows here, subhanAllah, that the youngster, Imam al-Shafi'i, as a young boy, he looked at the example of the people, the elderly around him, and he took from that. What does this tell you? Mothers and fathers, what does this tell you? It tells you that you have to be very keen and you have to be good examples to your children. Don't expect your children to just transform just like that and be pious and be quiet and that sort of thing if you can't start to instill some of those morals in them as well. You got to do it so that your children will also partake in those things. Insha'Allah ta'ala, as we continue, we will discuss whatever etiquettes we can get out of the salah and how to build that relationship with the children and to discipline them in that manner, insha'Allah ta'ala. So here's where we will pause for this evening. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our efforts in learning this beautiful way of life, al-Islam. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.